reality.
We knew this was going to be a problem.
The sheer speed of this race, developing a vaccine in roughly a year, is also proving to be its greatest handicap.
Not enough attention has been paid to prepare the public for what's coming.
If you will receive the vaccine, raise your hand.
For years, Dan Rather was a familiar and trusted face in millions of American homes. What is your assessment of the state of America right now?
Well, we are deeply divided, there's no question. However, the United States of America is not, despite rumors to the contrary, falling apart.
Hello from Washington, D.C. I'm Dawna Friesen. The presidential election is over. The turnout was historic, but this country remains deeply divided politically. The bitter partisanship is expected to linger. My conversation about that with veteran journalist Dan Rather is just ahead. But first, a story about what the whole world is waiting for: a vaccine for the coronavirus. 11 candidates are in phase 3 of human clinical trials. One or more of them could be deemed safe and effective soon, within months, if not weeks. Canada has already signed agreements with the manufacturers of 7 vaccine candidates so that if they're approved, Canadians will get millions of doses. A vaccine is what could save lives and release us from all the public health restrictions. But you might be surprised how many Canadians are hesitant about it. These aren't so-called anti-vaxxers. These are people who believe in modern medicine, who have had all the childhood vaccines to protect against other serious diseases. But a vaccine against COVID-19? Carolyn Jarvis found plenty of Canadians who aren't so sure.
If you will receive the vaccine once it is ready and approved for use in Canada, raise your hand. And if you're going to wait, and if you are a hard no, raise your hand.
We assembled 9 Canadians from across the country to discuss the COVID-19 vaccine and where they stood on taking it. Graham Reed worked in the aerospace industry until 2 months ago.
I got laid off from probably like my dream job. I think I would take the vaccine right away because having that vaccine, I think, will definitely help not only myself get back to what you would call normal, but I think would help the world overcome this disease.
No.
Teresa Singh is a mother, and for 16 years, she was a nurse.
You're not against mainstream medicine.
100% not. I am not against mainstream medicine. I love it. I respect the specialists. The doctors are brilliant. They're geniuses. We need our healthcare system. But I think there is other approaches we can be using instead of this rush job vaccine to a virus, from what I understand, mutates.
Karen Methvin is immune suppressed.
If you got COVID, what do you think would happen?
I would essentially, if I got COVID, watch myself deteriorate till the point I had pneumonia and started organ failure, and I would die in a rather grotesque way.
So the vaccine for you is life and death?
Yeah.
And you're putting your hand up saying I'm first in line?
If I could be first in line, I would, yes.
At 74, Britt Bright has already lived through a pandemic and an epidemic.
And I have reduced lung function today as a result of it. So I'm very much in favor of any kind of vaccine. Phase 3 trial, sign me up.
But many others who have stood in line for all the traditional vaccines in the past are hesitant about this one.
Talking about getting a vaccine out in 2021, that is unparalleled in anything that's happened before in vaccine history. So we just don't have a good track record on the risk of the vaccine.
The sheer speed of this race, developing a vaccine in roughly a year when it usually takes 5 to 10, is also proving to be its greatest handicap. What people want is more time.
I'm not going to get it until I'm satisfied, and I think I'll be satisfied in about 2 years.
There are usually mistakes when you typically rush things in general.
In a new poll for Global News conducted by Ipsos, 54% of Canadians agreed they'd take a COVID vaccine as soon as possible. But of those, only 22% of Canadians felt strongly about it. And when we asked about concerns over side effects, more than 80% of people said they'd wait to see what happens.
There was this naive belief that all of a sudden people will start accepting this vaccine.
Dr. Saad Omer, the director of Yale's Institute for Global Health, says we need a messaging campaign that matches the magnitude of a vaccine program.
There's a saying in vaccination, it's not vaccines that save lives, it's vaccination. A vaccine that remains in a vial is 100% safe, but 0% effective.
You know, hindsight's always 20/20. It would have been good if we could have been having this conversation 6 months ago.
Talking about how a vaccine is developed and the rigor it goes through, says psychologist Stephen Taylor.
You're saying back in the spring we should have been talking about this.
Yeah, because we knew this was going to be a problem.
Operation Warp Speed.
Warp Speed.
Warp Speed.
Warp Speed.
He also says naming the vaccine program in the US Operation Warp Speed doesn't help.
People need to see that things have been done properly and corners haven't been cut or things haven't been rushed.
We're not cutting corner, otherwise the vaccine would already be available now.
Pharma giant Sanofi Pasteur has signed an agreement with the Canadian government to provide 72 million doses of its vaccine, made in partnership with GlaxoSmithKline, if successful. Jean-Pierre Baillet is the general manager of Sanofi Pasteur Canada.
I think we don't communicate sufficiently on all the work that is done during the clinical trials, how it is tested. Do people know that there are 30,000 people in the trial? 30,000, can you imagine? We're going to follow up 30,000 people for 6 to 12 months.
That will happen once a vaccine reaches phase 3 of its clinical trial. Sanofi's leading candidate, which was first tested on animals with encouraging results, has now entered phase 2 and is being tried on about 400 people.
People are concerned that the speed at which this vaccine is being developed could mean that we won't know about long-term side effects. How do you address those concerns?
At Sanofi, we're using a technology for the COVID vaccine that is already in use for a flu vaccine. We're going to be able to provide, if successful, a vaccine that has already a long history, safety data. So I think this is a very good start.
With polls showing the growing vaccine concern, 9 pharmaceutical companies, including Sanofi, signed an historic pledge this past September, vowing to uphold science and safety. But before any vaccine reaches the public, it will have to be approved by Health Canada.
We want to make sure that the vaccine is manufactured appropriately and it's of high quality, and the millionth dose that's produced is exactly the same as the first dose that's produced.
Dr. Supriya Sharma is its chief medical advisor.
Fundamentally, what people want to know is this vaccine going to be safe? Is there any way for you to guarantee that?
What I want to say is that I will get the vaccine when it's authorized and when it's my time. I have absolute confidence in the Health Canada regulatory review process and the scientists and the reviewers that look at these vaccines to be able to say that Health Canada will not authorize a vaccine if it should not be released out for Canadians.
So where is Health Canada on that? I'm not hearing a lot about messaging from Health Canada right now when it comes to the vaccine.
Certainly when the vaccine is, any vaccine is approved, we committed to within 24 hours putting that information out there.
If you were going to give a grade to governments and pharmaceutical companies when it comes to their communication, what would it be?
For governments, so far as vaccines are concerned, I will give them an incomplete grade. Not enough attention has been paid to prepare the public for what's coming. So your communication campaign doesn't have to start with the first product being licensed. You're already too late.
We should be bringing the public along on this journey.
Heidi Larson is the founding director of the Vaccine Confidence Project, a research group based in London, England. She's traveled the world monitoring concerns over immunization programs and has seen what happens when they're not addressed.
The most dramatic example that I saw was in northern Nigeria, driven by political distrust that drove rumors, boycotted the polio vaccine for 11 months, but it reinfected with that virus from Nigeria around 20 countries and cost the global polio program $500 million to reset the clock. That's because they kept dismissing the rumors as just rumors and not listening to, well, wait a minute, maybe there's something that we need to pay attention to.
Larson says if we don't respond to the doubt that's creeping in, the gates are left wide open for other narratives. And that's exactly what Canadians told us.
I think just the biggest challenge that I've been experiencing
The sheer amount of misinformation and misguided information really is coming from us from everywhere.
Well, for me, I wonder if the trials are being done on children, and my kids are of mixed race. So are they going to take to it differently than their fully Caucasian friend?
Kids will not get the vaccine right away, says Dr. Sharma, with only one clinical trial conducted by Pfizer testing on children 12 and older. And people from different ethnicities will be included in phase 3 trials.
For my survival rate, for my age, it's 99.98%. In my situation, the risk of a reaction outweighs any benefit for me.
She doesn't know if she is 99%, because there are a lot of underlying factors. She may have a lot higher risk than she thinks she has. And it's not just about fatality. It's about the disabling longer-term symptoms that people should be considering.
Did you want to take this opportunity to address the misinformation? Is there stuff circulating that you want to counter?
Vaccines are safe. It's critical. I vaccinate my kids. I vaccinate my parents. Vaccines are safe.
I've heard some people say that getting a vaccine is about injecting myself with a virus. True or false?
No, false. You're not injecting yourself a virus. The common thing we hear, I was vaccinated against influenza and I was sick. You can't get the flu from your flu shot. What you inject yourself is dead, it's killed. So it cannot generate a disease. So it's a common myth that we need to break. And we hear that very, very often.
For Larson, dispelling these myths and listening to the concerns will be the next great test of this pandemic.
COVID is a huge opportunity for the public health and global health community. If we get this one right, that will have a huge value to vaccines more broadly. If we get this wrong, that will not be forgotten.
Coming up on The New Reality.
We're in a valley now. It may be a long valley, and in some ways it's a dark and dangerous valley, but we're going to come out the other side, and I believe we'll come out the other end of it better than we are today.
The American presidential election in the middle of a pandemic is now over, and voters in this country were highly motivated. Turnout is set to outpace any election in the last century, but there was no landslide, and the hard-fought campaign was between men whose character and beliefs couldn't be more different. Americans were deeply divided before this election, and they still are. My next guest has some thoughts on that.
This is the CBS Evening News with Dan Rather.
For years, Dan Rather was a familiar and trusted face in millions of American homes. He took over from Walter Cronkite at CBS and was one of the big three network TV news anchors, and had a long, at times controversial career at CBS before starting a new chapter online and writing essays defending democratic principles. We spoke earlier this week. You've got a great deal of perspective on America. You've been on the front lines of huge stories, from the assassination of JFK to the civil rights movement, the Vietnam War. What is your assessment of the state of America right now?
Well, we are deeply divided, there's no question. However, I think it's important to pull back for what we call in television the wide shot. The United States of America is not, despite rumors to the contrary, falling apart. Our institutions have held extremely well under great pressure, particularly these last 3 or 4 years. There are many good things happening in the country. I hope, and I honestly believe, will pull us somewhat together, but no one, especially Americans, should have any illusions. We do have deep problems, and we have to get on those problems before they get any deeper, of course.
Now, many people must rather know you as a former political reporter and a news anchor. That was back when people really trusted the news. Now, of course, there's mistrust in so much, in facts and science and journalism. How damaging is that to America's future?
Well, I think it's already been had some damage, and I think it can be very damaging going forward. Let me say first and foremost, those of us in the press, we make mistakes. You know, the practice of journalism is not an exact science. It's a kind of crude art. We can't do it perfectly, but we have to do it as best we can. But what's happened, particularly the last 3.5 to 4 years, is there's been an unrelenting attack on a broad range of American institutions by no less than the president himself, the press being one of those institutions. But, the president, he has attacked individual judges in the courts. He's attacked his political opponents in the Congress. He's attacked the whole field of journalism, not just individual journalists or particularly journalist institutions. He said all journalists, are in effect, quote, terrible people and enemies of the people. But, we understand as Americans that the red beating heart of democracy is a free, independent, truly independent, fiercely independent press when necessary. I do think there's a basic understanding of that, but it's certainly deteriorated, most especially under attacks directly from the president, and it's a serious problem going forward.
In the hours after the polls closed in this election, you wrote, "Victories are rarely easy, and the struggle for healing and hope takes time and perseverance because the forces of hate and lies are always easier to summon." That's poignant, and it's a healing message. And you posted it on Facebook because that's where you found a kind of renewed life, I guess, as a journalist and as a writer online. And yet social media, as you know, is such can be such a sewer and such a place to spread lies and hate and amplified so much of that. How do you navigate the good and the bad of social media?
Well, not very well in my own case, I'm afraid, but you have outlined it very well. But social media is an absolute cesspool of misinformation, lies, conspiracy theories, but it is also a tremendous tool for education and information. That one of the things that makes some of our problems so difficult to deal with today is the acceleration of the pace of change of the way information is distributed, primarily the internet. President Trump is our first social media president. Yes, President Obama dealt in it somewhat, but in the same way that John Kennedy, was our first television president back in the early 1960s, that here President Trump has been our first social media president. He has been a master of manipulating social media. You may not like him and like his policies, but you have to acknowledge that he's been masterful in doing it. His political opponents and frankly some members of the press and press in general have not quite caught up with him, and it's giving him quite an advantage. But going forward, we have to educate young people how to navigate the new media environment, which is overwhelmingly in many ways now based on the internet itself.
Is there anyone on the horizon in the United States who you see as a potential unifying force in the country?
Well, I'm hesitant to answer the question because if I name any one or two people, I'll be accused of bias or leaving out so many others. But I will say this, and I hope it's not seen as just sophomoric or some offbeat journalists just trying to speak nationalism. But this country is filled with talented people. It's filled with people with tremendous leadership abilities and capacities. And that's the reason I'm an optimist. Look, I know it's a difficult time, and I'm not some fuzzy-headed, well, everything's okay optimist. I'm an optimist who is a realist. But by both experience and nature, I'm optimistic, and I'm particularly optimistic about the future of our country. We're in a valley now. It may be a long valley, and in some ways it's a dark and dangerous valley, but we're going to come out the other side, and I believe we'll come out the other end of it better than we are today.
Coming up on The New Reality.
Here in Canada, we've had it pretty good. America has provided a welcome distraction from our own issues. Is that a good thing? I'm not sure.
It was 52 years ago here in Washington at the Press Club that former Canadian Prime Minister Pierre Trudeau uttered his famous quote. He said, "Living next to the U.S. is in some ways like sleeping with an elephant. No matter how friendly and even-tempered is the beast," he said, "one is affected by every twitch and grunt." It was true then, and it's still true today. Every time the U.S. has a presidential election, Canadians pay close attention, even though we know most Americans can't name our prime minister or our capital city and think our biggest export is maple syrup. Well, Stuart Reynolds, the man known as Brittlestar, thinks maybe that's not such a bad thing.
Here in Canada, we've had it pretty good. America, however, has been going through a rough patch. Rising COVID numbers, the bulk cause of which seems to be thanks to groups of people who don't want to wear masks, think we're all overreacting, and probably think that birds aren't real. To be fair, there's a good reason those people believe that, and that reason is those people are not very smart. And let's not forget that non-stop 24/7 reality show, America's Next Old President. We've been so focused on that live-action Scooby-Doo mystery here in Canada that I had to remind myself not to vote on their election day because I'm in Canada and not American. America has provided a welcome distraction from our own issues. Is that a good thing? I'm not sure. But I can pretty much guarantee that the scandals that have rocked the nation here in the Great White North would barely get a tweet if they happened in America. Can you imagine if the WE scandal happened in the US? It'd be a tuba factory. That's not to say our issues aren't important. They are, vitally. But it's like when you'd be out with your friends for the night, and the next morning, as long as you could, with certainty, establish that one of your friends was drunker and or stupider than you were good, you know? Like, sure, I may have cat-crawled on top of the bar, but Janie threw up on that guy's shoes. It's good to have someone to distract from your own problems. But here in Canada, we should probably keep working on our own issues. Like, COVID isn't exactly disappearing up here either. And the economy could use some love. Or Indigenous rights. Or racism. Or, ugh. I almost hope that America doesn't get it all figured out. It takes the pressure off us, you know?
The New Reality will be back next Saturday. I'm Dawna Friesen. Good night.